Okay. In the beginning of the course, we covered some of the kind of basic general rules of anatomy and physiology, defining what it is, talking about chemical, molecular, and cellular basis of life, defining what life is, uh, processes like homeostasis and rheostasis, positive and negative feedback loops. Then we moved on to the systems that give us shape and size and posture and mobility, and those are the integumentary, skeletal, and muscular systems. As you saw over the last couple of months, those systems are not passive. They're not just sitting there. They're very active, dynamic systems. So, for instance, bones are also important organs in the homeostasis of calcium and phosphorus. And so are the other active tissues like tendons and ligaments and teeth and hair and nails and cartilage of various kinds. Skin is also an actively working organ for thermoregulation, secretion, protection. Has all sorts of sensory systems inside of it, different kinds of glands, uh, and producing vitamin D. So it's also a metabolically active organ. And then muscles, obviously, they do a lot of work, a lot of movement, both internal movement uh, by heart and smooth muscles, and the movement of our body in space using skeletal muscles. Uh, Now we're going to move to the next section, which is probably the most interesting, but also probably the most difficult part of this course. And this is the section where we cover the so called controlling uh, physiological systems. Uh, so I mentioned that before that all the organ systems can be divided into controlling ones and the controlled ones. Controlled ones are, cardiovascular and immune, reproductive, urinary, digestive, respiratory, um, musculoskeletal. They're all controlled. And who's doing the control? The controlling systems. Controlling systems are nervous, sensory, circadian, and endocrine systems. Uh, Sensory system is actually a subset of the nervous system. Those are modified parts of the nervous system. Circadian system is built by some parts of the nervous system and some parts of the endocrine system working together. So those four, we teach them separately, but they are all actually very highly connected with each other, and they work in unison. They work together. The sensory, nervous, endocrine, and circadian systems can be considered as a one gigantic, really complex system. So, what do those systems do? Well, when we talk about anatomy, talking about what and where. It's a very kind of static view of the body, right? The size and shape and color and location of every organ, and then maybe slice it and see what is it made of, and put it under a microscope to see what kind of cells it's made of. So it's a very static description of the body. Physiology is dynamic, and what does it mean, dynamic? When we talk about dynamics, it means what happens when. It is the time that is the key dimension here. And this is where the controlling systems come in because they control the timing. When should each other organ or organ system do what it does? Heart knows what to do. There's only one thing that the heart can do. There's only one thing the kidney can do. There's only one thing that the intestine can do. It's the nervous, sensory, endocrine, circadian system that tells it exactly when to do it, when to do more of it, when to do less of it, when to intensify, when to kind of inhibit, uh, when to completely stop. So uh, it's all about time. In physiology, it's all about time, and it's these controlling systems that tell all the rest of the body what to do, not just what to do, because they can do only one thing, or when to do what they do, and with what speed and with what energy. So, how do they do it? Uh, the controlling systems are, first of all, monitoring the environment. The environment consists of external environment, watching what's happening outside, and internal environment, what's happening on the inside. Is homeostasis all right? Um, and if everything is all right and nothing to worry about, then um, there's nothing to do, right? There's no special decisions to make. But if there's some change in the environment, either internal or external, then all these sensory organs are going to um provide all that information and give it to the nervous system. The nervous system is going to compare the information that's coming from all of those sensory organs, you know, from hearing, from smell, from seeing, from internal senses. It's going to compare that to the physical state of the organism, to the mental state of the organism, to the time of day and time of year, um, and we'll make a decision that is going to integrate all of that information that is coming from the sensors, and it's going to make the decision. And that decision is going to then be relayed through motor neurons to either the endocrine glands or to the muscles. And then the muscles and glands are going to do what they're told to do. And if that muscle, if that impulse is telling an endocrine gland to secrete a hormone, that hormone is then in turn going to tell other organ systems to speed up or slow down or start or stop their functioning. So this is how they work in concert. Circadian system is mainly involved in uh, timing things that are predictable, like there's day and night. Those are things that are predictable. It's preparing the body to start doing things in the morning, stop doing them in the evening, or vice versa. Those kinds of things. This is also involved in internal coordination. There are processes that need to happen simultaneously. So organ A and organ B need to do something simultaneously, or otherwise nothing happens. Or there are other situations where, for instance, two biochemical pathways are competing for the same enzyme. So you don't want them happening at the same time. So you want process A to happen at one time, process B at another time, one during the day, one during the night, something like that. And circadian system is going to regulate that. So those four systems are really working in unison. They're working together. Still, we are going to, learn them one at a time, and then kind of put it all together because there's a lot of material, and that material has to be organized in some way. So we're going to start with the nervous system. And in this very first video, I'm just going to go over the very, very basic kind of definitions of the nervous system and its parts and its main cells. With the kind of basic information about the nervous system, we are going to first divide the nervous system into the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system includes the brain and the spinal cord. Everything else, all the other nerves, wherever they may be, are peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system is CNS, peripheral nervous system is PNS. So if I say CNS or PNS as an abbreviation, you will know what I'm talking about. There are two types of cells that make the nervous system. There are neurons and glia. Neurons are doing kind of the functional part of it. They are the communication cells. They are the cells that take the information from the environment or from a sensory organ, integrate, and then send that information to the next cell, which could be another neuron, or it can be a gland, it can be a muscle. Uh, Glia are supporting cells. There are several different types of glia, and they have various functions inside of the body, surrounding the neurons, helping the neurons, modifying the activity of neurons in various ways. We're going to get into that in a second. A neuron is going to have a cell body which is called a soma. Each neuron has exactly one nucleus, and it has a lot of other organelles, mitochondria, and all that stuff. And those are very active cells. They're energy hungry cells. They will take up a lot of energy, a lot of glucose, so they have to have a lot of mitochondria to produce ATP for the activity of the nerve cells. Uh, there's also a lot of transcription and translation happening in there, and there's relatively new evidence that RNAs get edited as new memories are made, that actually individual neurons can have some part of their own kind of memory and they do it by modifying the sequences of RNA. The neuron also has processes. Cytoplasmatic processes is kind of short and stubby, are called dendrites. They're usually branching like a tree. That's why dendrite means like a tree-like or branch-like process. Uh, and they have a one long non-branching, usually non-branching process on the other side of the cell, which is called an axon. The information passes through the neuron always in the same direction, from the dendrite through the body to the axon, and at the end of the axon, it signals through a synapse to another cell. So um, this that's the basic kind of structure of a neuron. Um, the cell bodies are darker. So when you have a bunch of cell bodies next to each other, congregated together, it looks like darker gray, and that is called gray matter. While when you have a lot of axons bundled together, they're lighter, and this is called white matter. The whiteness comes from myelin sheets that are wrapped around each axon, and those myelin sheets are rich with lipids. It's fat tissue, right? And it's going to be kind of whitish, and that's why it's called the white matter. Uh, the bundles of axons, so that white matter, if in the central nervous system, are called tracts. Bundles of axons in the peripheral nervous system are called nerves. Sometimes the same bundle can be called both. For instance, when you have a bunch of axons going from the retina of the eye towards the brain, they're called optic nerves. They're nerves. And once they get into the brain, they join in a structure called the optic chiasm, and after that, those two bundles of neurons, same neurons, continue, but they're now part of the brain. They're inside of the central nervous system, and now they're called optic tracts. Um, the collections of many cell bodies, the gray matter, uh, they often perform the same function. They're collected in the same place for a reason, so they can work together, and they also have different names depends when they are. In the central nervous system inside of the brain, they're called nuclei. In the peripheral nervous system, they're called ganglia. Um, so nervous system has kind of functionally three parts. One is processing of sensory information, so that's sensation. The other one is integration of that information, getting all that sensory information together, comparing with each other, comparing with hormonal state, mental state, physical state, time of day, time of year, all that stuff. So all the integrated parts of the nervous system, and then the motor control, the response. Those are the neurons that are telling the effector organs, the glands, muscles, what to do and when to do it. So there are changes in internal and external environment. They're detected a variety of sensory organs, sensory cells, and they send that information, the stimulus, to the nervous system. And then the nervous system, especially the central nervous system, receives that information, the stimuli from several different sensory organs, compares them to each other, and integrates that information, makes this decision. And then you have the response. Once the decision is made, the nervous system tells other organs or systems in the body to, modify their activity in some way. Slow down the heart, speed up the heart, contract a muscle, relax a muscle. Um, Whatever it tells you to do, it tells you to do now, which is timing, right? It's all about timing. So all the nerves that take information from the periphery to the central nervous system, to the spinal cord and brain, are called sensory nerves. They're providing that information from the outside environment and inside environment and bringing it to the integrative parts of the nervous system, which is the central nervous system. The brain and the spinal cord are integrators. They're doing all that integration. Um, all the nerves that take those decisions from the central nervous system to the effectors, to the muscles or glands, be it skeletal muscles or smooth muscles or heart muscle or various glands, endocrine or exocrine glands, those are all motor nerves or motor pathways. So you have centripetal or uh, efferent pathways. There's a sensory, and then you have centrifugal or afferent pathways going away from the central nervous system to the effector organs. Uh, the motor pathways, those going from the central nervous system to the effectors, are are divided into two domains. There's somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. Somatic nervous system is under voluntary control, and the targets, the effectors of that system are skeletal muscles. That's how we have voluntary control over the skeletal muscles. Autonomic nervous system is not under voluntary control. Its targets or effector organs are smooth muscles, heart muscle, or glands, endocrine or exocrine. Autonomic nervous system or vegetative nervous system has two subdivisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic and parasympathetic systems do opposite things. Each one of them has an opposite effect on every organ that they innervate or each organ that they target. Sympathetic nervous system is active during stress, the stress response. It acts on many organ systems, but most importantly, it releases the energy stores. So it releases glucose out of uh, glucose stores in muscles and liver and whatnot, and takes it to the muscles. It stimulates the organs that are needed for the response. What is a stress response? It's a fear of something, so you need to run away from it or fight it. So the most important target for stress response is muscle. So muscles are going to be stimulated, and everything that helps the muscles do is going to be stimulated. Whatever is going to take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide, which muscles are, burning oxygen like crazy because they're burning glucose like crazy because they're contracting, they're working. So respiratory system is going to be stimulated. You're going to breathe faster and deeper. All of that oxygen and carbon dioxide needs to be transported quickly to the muscles and from the muscles. And all the glucose from all the stores has to be taken to the active muscles. So who's going to do that? So cardiovascular system. So that is going to be the system that's going to be stimulated during the stress response. Everything else, all the other organ systems can wait. They are normally taking up some energy, but for a brief amount of time while you're fighting or fleeing, those systems are going to be inhibited. So sympathetic nervous system is going to inhibit the digestive system, the immune system, the reproductive system, the urinary system, because those are not essential for providing energy to the muscles. Once the stress is over, you have successfully fought off the enemy or managed to run away. Then you calm down, and then sympathetic nervous system kind of shuts down, and parasympathetic system, which is its antagonist, which does everything opposite. It kicks in and slows down the reproductive system and slows down the cardiovascular system and puts glucose back into the stores and calms down muscles and kicks back on all those that have been suppressed, inhibited. So the digestive tract can go back to work, immune tract can go back to work, reproductive system, urinary system, all those systems can go back to work, while those that were inhibiting by the sympathetic nerves during stress. Those two systems, sympathetic versus parasympathetic, they use a different neurotransmitter, the different chemical that they secrete at the end of the axon in order to stimulate their target uh, target tissues. So parasympathetic system, the peace and quiet system, is using acetylcholine. Remember, it's the same neurotransmitter that is used by motor neurons to stimulate muscles to contract. But acetylcholine elsewhere is going to have a stimulating effect on systems that have been inhibited during stress, and it's going to have an inhibited in fact effect on organs and organ systems that have been stimulated during stress. Sympathetic nervous system, the stress system, uses norepinephrine or noradrenaline as its uh, neurotransmitter. So, norepinephrine or noradrenaline is also a hormone that comes from the adrenal glands. Adrenal glands are also part of the stress response. They're going to have, secretion of those hormones at the same time. Sympathetic nervous system working faster, and endocrine system, the adrenal glands secreting those same hormones, but acting slower, a little bit more longer lasting. There's another part of the body that has kind of its own nervous system, and that is the GI tract. There's a lot of nervous tissue in the digestive tract, and it's kind of independent. It is tasked with making sure that there's movement and secretion in the digestive tract. We're going to get to the digestive tract. There's a lot going on there, but it's a long tube that has to do a lot of moving the food down its tract, and there's a lot of glands that need to be secreting at different times, different kinds of enzymes, and so it's all controlled locally by a local, what is called the enteric nervous system. No, it's not completely independent. The central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, including the sympathetic and the parasympathetic portions of the vegetative or autonomous nervous system, can bring inputs to the enteric nervous system and modify its its function. Okay, uh, going back to the cells, to the neurons. A neuron has a body, the soma, has dendrites, and has an axon. Now, every neuron is going to have one axon. No big deal. Okay. But different neurons are going to have different uh, numbers and locations of dendrites. And so we can classify neurons by that fact. Most neurons in the body are what is called multipolar. On one side of the soma are many dendrites. On the other side of the soma is a single axon. However, there are some neurons that look a little bit different, and they are found in specialized sensory organs. Those are modified neurons in some way. And they can be bipolar, which means there's one dendrite on one end and one axon on the other. You'll find those in the olfactory system and in the visual system. And then they are unipolar, or your textbook calls it pseudo-unipolar, where you have a soma. Out of it comes an axon. Axon splits into two branches, one going to the central, one going to the peripheral nervous system. And one of those branches has a dendrite attached to the axon itself. So the dendrite is getting information from the outside, immediately giving it to the axon, and axon can quickly um, get pass that information either to the central or to the peripheral nervous system. It speeds up things, and when you have vision or something like that, you want things to happen at a great speed. Because you don't have great speed, let's say it's a visual system. If it goes slowly, then it's all like watching those old movies. You're going to see a image and then black and then image and then black and then image and then black, instead of having one smooth image and one smooth kind of movement as you're observing. So neurons in the sensory systems often have to work faster than in other places. There are some neurons in in sensory organs that use gap junctions in order to pass ions from one cell to the next, so it's even faster. And that's why we have these unipolar or pseudo-unipolar as well as bipolar neurons inside of sensory structures, multipolar everywhere else. We also refer to neurons by their function, so there's like an olfactory neuron or motor neuron or something like that. And they're also classified by shape, so you have like pyramidal neurons because that's the shape of like a pyramid. Sometimes they are named after the discoverer, so you have the Purkinje cells. So there's different ways of classifying neurons. Depends on what you want to accomplish. What are you trying to do? Um, okay, so the information is going to come into the neuron via dendrite, and so that is going to change the electrical polarity or the membrane potential of the dendrite, which is going to flow down the dendrite onto the soma, and for the most part, it's going to kind of fizzle out. However, if there's a lot of stimulation going into that cell through a number of dendrites, and those things kind of, potentiate each other, that potential may travel all the way to the other end of the soma, to the place where axon starts. The place where axon starts is called the axon hillock. If it reaches a threshold of how much that voltage over the membrane has changed, it's going to trigger an action potential. An action potential is a change of membrane potential, membrane voltage uh, in the axon, which then moves from the beginning axon of the axon all the way down the length of the axon all the way to the end. When it comes to the end, it is going to stimulate the opening of vesicles full of neurotransmitters out of the bouton. That's the end of the axon into the synapse, that tiny little space between the end of the neuron and the beginning of another cell, another neuron or gland or muscle, which is going to have receptors for exactly that neurotransmitter, is going to respond to that neurotransmitter. So that's how the neuron communicates to the other cell. Um, in invertebrates, the only way to speed up the movement of the action potential from the beginning of the axon to the end of the axon is to make the axon thicker. It's pure physics, has to do with the diameter of the wire and how much electricity with what speed can go from one end of the wire to the next. And so once you have you look at it, you think of invertebrates, most of them are tiny little insects and whatnot, but there are some large invertebrates like octopus and squid, right? And there's even giant squid. And those are big animals, and they need to move fast. They're, swimming around and attacking and being attacked and have to defend themselves, and so they have to move fast. And then the only way to move fast is by, having faster action potentials going from one end of the animal to the other, which means they're going to have to make those axons thick. In the squid, the axons are so thick they're visible with the naked eye, which is why all the experimentation, everything we know about how neurons work, about their chemistry and the ions and the channels and everything, we learned everything about that from the studies of the giant neuron of the squid. Not the neuron of a giant squid, but the giant neuron, there's like two of them going down the body of the squid, and they're so big that you can poke electrodes into them with your bare hand. And you can then measure potentials on the inside and outside of the neuron while you're passing electricity through it, and that's how we'll learn how neurons work. But we're not invertebrates, we're vertebrates. And vertebrates have evolved a different strategy for speeding up the transmission of information from one end of the neuron to the other. And that is by putting isolation tape around the wire. How does it work in a vertebrate? There are glial cells that are wrapping myelin sheaths around the axon. Myelin sheets are those things that are making axons look white because they're full of lipid. What happens when an action potential that started at an axon hillock starts moving? Well, if it hits a place that has isolation tape around it, a myelin sheet around it, doesn't have to spend time going through it. It will jump to the end of it. And there's the next one, jumps to the next one. There's the next one, jumps to the next one. There's the next one, jumps to the next one. This is called saltatory. Saltation means jumping. It's a jumping way of going. It's incredibly speeds up the rate at which an action potential can go from one end of the neuron to the next. Uh, and the gaps between the two myelin sheets are called nodes of Ranvier. Those are the gaps. So the stimulus jumps from one gap to the next, from one node of Ranvier to the next, until it gets to the end of the neuron, where it then stimulates the secretion of neurotransmitter into the synapse and thus stimulating the next cell. Uh, we're going to talk more about action potentials and the synapses in the next video. Now let's turn our attention a little bit to the glial cells. So originally, when people started dissecting brains and nervous systems, they have realized that there's a lot of cells kind of surrounding the neurons, and they call them glia because glia means glue. And they thought that it was just simply kind of a structural support that something holding neurons together. But now, we have studied glia for a long time, and now we know they have dozens of different functions, including modifying the way neurons work, or providing nutrition for the neurons, doing all sorts of other things. There are different types of glia in the central nervous system and different ones in the peripheral nervous system. In the central nervous system, we have astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, microglia, and ependymal cells. I have wonderful pictures and explanations in your textbook. So astrocytes are small. They're very numerous. There's more of them than the neurons. They're shaped like stars, and they do a lot of that kind of functional stuff that we have kind of discovered over the past decade or so. So they make sure there's an optimal concentration of various molecules and ions outside of neurons, like calcium and sodium and potassium and all that stuff. They recycle neurotransmitters. Now, when neurotransmitter is secreted into the synapse and then gets released, where is it going to go? Well, an astrocyte is going to pick it up and recycle it in some way. Maybe put it back into the neuron or break it down and then give those breakdown products to the neuron to make more. It's going to also uh, repair damage to the neurons. Uh, and astrocytes are also closely hugging all the capillaries in the nervous system in the brain. They're producing blood-brain barriers. So you have capillaries that are bringing blood to the brain, and they're already pretty tight. But all sorts of things can pass from the brain, blood to the brain, and vice versa. But once you have astrocytes packed on top of those capillaries, completely hugging them and wrapping them all over, they are providing even tighter control of what can pass through. Not everything can go from the blood to the brain, and that is called the blood-brain barrier. Oligodendrocytes are glial cells that produce myelin sheaths and wrap them around the axons. In the central nervous system in the brain, oligodendrocytes are producing myelin sheaths that are wrapped around multiple neurons. So there's one oligodendrocyte, and it puts myelin sheath around this axon and that axon and that axon and that axon. It produces myelin sheaths that are wrapped around several neighboring axons. Microglia are immune cells of the brain or the central nervous system. They are macrophages, so they find and hunt down and eat and digest various foreign particles, cellular debris, bacteria, whatever they can find inside of the central nervous system. Ependymal cells are filtering blood to produce cerebrospinal fluid, and also some of the ependymal cells have cilia on their surfaces that move the cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is a liquid that fills the brain ventricles and the spinal canal. Now, in the peripheral nervous system, we find different glial cells. There's satellite cells and Schwann cells. Satellite cells are the peripheral version of astrocytes. But in the peripheral nervous system, they're interesting that they're actually not just doing all their stuff around the neurons. They're actually glued to them. They're contacting the neurons, the bodies of the neurons, the somas of the neurons, and they're covering them. So they're not just kind of all the way around, they are actually in close contact with the neurons in the peripheral nervous system, and they have some of the same functions that the astrocytes have in the central nervous system. Schwann cells are the peripheral versions of the oligodendrocytes. The difference is that the Schwann cell makes just one myelin sheath, which is wrapped just around one axon, and the whole Schwann cell gets very, very flat like a pancake and wraps around the axon, and that's it. One cell, one wrapping between the two nodes of RNVS. So the next wrap is going to be the next cell. The next wrap is next cell. So there's lots and lots of Schwann cells. They're smaller, and each one of them makes just one wrap around one axon. So they don't do multiple axons the way the oligodendrocytes do inside of the brain. All right, in the next video, we're going to talk about more about the action potential and the synaptic transmission, and then we'll move on to other parts of the nervous system.